It relates to this issue that people raise where they challenge the possibility of any redemptive dimension to pain and adversity. And though God is never responsible for the commitment of evil, nevertheless, he can use it. He's sovereign enough to accomplish his purposes by means even of the wicked intentions of humanity and of angelic forces. And he can use this ultimately for a greater good. Remember, we call this a divine comedy, speaking about the fact that distorted relationships and misconstruals can ultimately converge into a greater good at the end of the comedy when all things get reconciled and sorted out, so that there is a growth and a development of character. Think of any good film you've seen or any great novel you've read, and what do you discover in the process of seeing a film? Let's say, for example, the first one that just pops into my mind is Rain Man. And you think of Tom Cruise's character and Charlie Babbitt and his brother Raymond. And Charlie, all he wants is the money. All he wants really is to manipulate the process to get himself taken care of. He couldn't really care less about his brother in any meaningful way. But through a painful series of setbacks and problems and so forth, what do you discover by the end of the film? That his intentions have changed. And what now does he value? He treasures his brother, he treasures relationships, and there's a depth of his character he could never have had without that actual adversity and all those setbacks. The same thing happens in another film just comes to my mind, Gladiator, when you think about the fact that Maximus, at the earlier part of the film, all he's looking for is revenge. But as the film develops, there is a growing theme about seeing his loved ones again, about the Elysian fields and about his wife and his son who are waiting for him, and about the fact that he has this growing aspiration for the thing that will endure and for those relationships. And so he himself then develops in character and pursues something which, by the way, one of the interesting points of that film is here's a pagan who is willing to sacrifice more for his vision of the afterlife than most Christians are for theirs. But that's another story. The fact is, if you look at any number of great films that are things that are comedies, that is to say, if it ends well, but even in tragedies there can be the development of a process whereby we discover what we thought we wanted was really not what we needed. And pain and adversity can move us away from our wants to our true needs. And again, in the character arc of a story, you discover that a hero often starts off with what he wants, but he later discovers what he wanted was really not what he needed, not the best thing for him. And so it's often adversity that does this. And if we can do this in film and in drama and in literature, cannot God do this in history? So this is why the idea of a divine comedy that ends well is one where God will use pain redemptively, even to accomplish his purposes, and that nothing, no pain, no suffering, no sorrow for those who want to know him will actually be wasted or lost. And that's a very important perspective. It is heaven that really gives us the answer to the pains of earth. It is an eschatological solution, which means basically that we are considering what's going to come, what's the future. And when we recognize then that a person may go through great pain and adversity for decades in this world, I believe, though, when they see Christ, I think that what they will see is that 5 minutes in his presence would be more than worth the 80 years of affliction on earth. And it's my belief as well that if he said after 5 minutes, now, are you willing to spend another 80 years of adversity to see me another 5 minutes? I don't think we'd hesitate. I really don't. But the beauty is that the 80 years is nothing and the 5 minutes is eternity. And that's what the perspective that Paul maintained was all about. I consider Romans 8:18, the sufferings of this present time not even worth comparing to the glory to be revealed to us. And that's the perspective of a person who's more than an overcomer. Because he understood, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. He understood that. To die is gain. So he recognized that nothing can defeat God's eternal purposes in him. It is true that his opponents ended his life, his physical life, but they could not end his spiritual life. They could not eliminate that which would endure forever. And we who are in this world are being crafted and shaped by God for eternity. And in this world we encounter many misconstruals, adversities, oppositions, pains, setbacks, broken dreams. And as we go through those kinds of contexts, it is well for us to engage in a biblical perspective so that we can think well and clearly about what's happened to us and what might be happening to us and where God's promises are, so that we develop a history of gratitude whereby we remember and recall on a regular basis God's many benefits and gifts and graces to us in the past. So we have a perspective on our present. If God could carry me through in those things in the past, can he carry me through in the present distress? And furthermore, we also have, in addition to what he's done in the past, we have his promises for the future. And we have the resurrected Christ who assures us that he is, in fact, going to come again. And he's going to receive us to himself, that where he is, there we may be also. So we have that assurance then of a future that will end well, and we recognize then that God is going to accomplish all things well, so that no one, when we stand before him, will object. No one will say, but I thought you promised. They'll all recognize when they see him that he was indeed more than just. He was gracious and he was merciful. And it's an important point of view that we need to maintain. Last time we talked about the fact that some forms of evil are necessary, it seems, to permit human freedom. And we talked about the fact that much of our pain, sorrow, and adversity is a direct or perhaps an indirect consequence of either our decisions or those of others. And that the vast bulk of the pain we encounter can be this way. We recognize that some forms of pain and adversity can actually prevent worse ones. And we talked about how, for example, that certain pains can be warnings about worse pains physically, and certain moral pains as consequences of our actions can be warnings about worse moral consequences if we do not take heed and gain lessons. So it can permit human freedom, because remember the argument that people say, why doesn't God eliminate all evil? If he were to eliminate all evil, who of us would be around at 12:01 if he did it at midnight tonight? So the thing you want to be careful about, and people are always selective, they really want him to eliminate stuff they're not doing. But the fact is that you have to realize that God is going to bring evil to an end, but he is permitting certain things so that we would have the ability to make choices, and our choices do shape our eternity. It prevents greater evils, and it can also promote a greater good. And this is important for us to recognize, both an immediate good as well as a long-term or eternal good. That God can accomplish things that bring us immediate moral development and perfecting. But God can also accomplish things in our lives that will drive us to our real condition before Christ. And we'll recognize that we, if all things were going our way, might not ever really grasp our condition of true desperation as people before God. It is only as a result of need that we come to him, I fear. And he understands it. He stoops to conquer. If that is what it takes, so be it. If it's restlessness, if it's need, whatever. No one's going to come to God out of ultimately pure motives, just wanting him for himself. They'll come to him ultimately because they recognize they are people who are desperate. And that is why Romans chapter 3, 1 through 3, develops the bad news before he talks about the good news. He spends the bulk of 3 chapters talking about condemnation before he begins to talk about God's solution, which is the provision of justification. For why would one want to come to Christ? Why would one want to give up their life for him if they found everything was going their way? The scriptures have a very realistic anthropology. a realistic view of the human heart, which recognizes that we in our natural state are at enmity with God and would not pursue him unless, in fact, we found ourselves in a position where we had nowhere else to look.